Hello and welcome back to another episode here at the Pilgrim's Well. Today we're continuing our Pilgrim's journey as we follow Christian. Last time we ended with Christian being in the valley of the shadow of death, and today we're going to continue that. The last thought we had last time as we were reading was that Christian wasn't able to discern who was whispering all these things to him. Was it his own thoughts or someone else? So we'll pick it up here. When Christian had traveled in this disconsolate, that means a depressed condition, for some considerable time, he then thought he heard the voice of a man on pilgrimage ahead of him saying, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." As a result, he felt very glad, and that for the following reasons. First, because he gathered from what he heard that some who feared God were in this valley as well as himself. Second, since he understood that God was assuredly with him as well as a prospective companion, even in such a dark and dismal region with all of its hindrances. Third, for the hope that he entertained of eventually having fellowship, should he be able to overtake whoever was before him. So he went on and called out to the man who was ahead, though he did not know what to say in reply, since he had also thought himself to be alone. Eventually, the light of the morning dawned. At this, Christian exclaimed, "He has turned the shadow of death into the morning." Now that a new day had come, he looked back, not out of a desire to return, but rather to see more clearly by daylight exactly what hazards he had encountered in the dark. So he saw more distinctly the ditch that was on the one side and the quagmire that was on the other. He also perceived just how narrow the way was that lay between these perils. Furthermore, he also identified the hobgoblins, satyrs, and dragons of the pit, even though they were now some distance from him. Apparently, after daybreak, they were reluctant to draw near, though he saw them in fulfillment of it being written, "He reveals deep things out of darkness and brings to light the shadow of death." So Christian was greatly moved with his deliverance from all the dangers of his solitary journey so far. Now these trials, though he feared them more than ever, yet had become more apparent to him because the light of day had exposed him. So when the sun now rising, this advantage offered Christian even more mercy. For it is to be noted that though the first part of the valley of the shadow of death was dangerous, yet the second part ahead of him, if at all possible, far more dangerous. This was because throughout the remainder of the valley there were set up innumerable snares, traps, and catching devices, and nets, as well as there being countless pits and pitfalls, deep holes, and unsafe ledges in those depths. It had now been dark, as has been formerly the case, though he possessed 1,000 souls, yet they would all have been lost in this region. But as I said, the sun was now rising. For this reason, the pilgrim declared, "His candle shines on my head, and by his light I go through the darkness." Therefore, in this light, Christian came to the end of the valley. Now I saw in my dream that at the end of this valley there lay blood, bones, ashes, and the mangled bodies of men, even of pilgrims who had earlier come this way. And while I was musing over what could be the reason for these remains, I noticed a short way ahead a cave in which lived two giants, Pope and Pagan. Here they had lived for a long time, and by power and tyranny had cruelly put to death the man whose blood, bones, and ashes lay before him. Yet at this place Christian passed by without much danger, and this somewhat surprised me. But subsequently I have learned that Pagan had been dead for many a day, and as for Pope, though he was still alive, yet on account of his old age and the many shrewd conflicts that he had met in his younger days, he has grown crazy and stiff in his joints. As a result, he can now do little more than sit in the mouth of his cave, grinning at pilgrims as they go by and biting his nails, being frustrated because he could not intercept them. So I saw that Christian went on his way, though at the sight of the old man that sat on the mouth of the cave, he could not decide what to think, especially because Pope was unable to approach him, though he threateningly spoke. You will never mend until more of you are burned. But he, that is Christian, held his peace and smiled as he passed by, though without suffering any harm. And then Christian saying, O God, O world of wonders, that I should be preserved in this distress, that I have met here, O blessed be, that hand that formed it has delivered me. Dangers and darkness, devils, hell and sin did compass me while in this vale was in. That snares and pits and traps and nets did lie about my path, that worthless silly I might have caught and tangled and cast down. But since I live, let Jesus wear the crown. Well, that is the end of the valley of the shadow of death. Now you can see the second part of the valley was just as dangerous as the first part of the valley. It was even more dangerous, right? He says there's many snares and traps and all these things that could kill him. But there was a difference. What was the difference? Do you remember? It was the sun, who started to come up and started to give light in the midst of all these dangers. The sun, of course, is representative, as John Bunyan explains, of the grace of God, of the light of God. And with the light of God's grace, there is the light that comes in, and you can see Christ's grace coming to shine through. And in the midst of this valley, it makes everything much less fearful and frightening than it was before. It is no longer a scary place, at least not as scary as before, because now he can see where he goes. And then he meets these two giants, or at least he doesn't meet them in a sense that he's in great conflict with them, but he has to walk past them, and they're pagan and pope. Now this brings us back a little bit in church history at the time of John Bunyan, where you have these two dangers in England, the pagans, those who are against Christianity and true pilgrims because they have pagan practices. Right? At that time in Europe, there would be a lot of tree worship, or at least before that, there'd be a lot of worship of trees and ancient religions that would be against Christianity. That has kind of passed, and now the Pope at the Catholic Church had been trying to suppress the Reformation and trying to suppress Christians at the time. And that was a danger, but at the time of John Bunyan, this had kind of subsided, so you don't have this threat of the Roman Catholic Church as much as you had before. And so this kind of is not in America as much today. It might come. Those who are outside of Christianity might begin to persecute Christians again more and more and leave blood and bones and ashes, people that suffer for their faith and even die in this world. But the point that John Bunyan is pointing out is that those who walk with Christ can be confident if they stay on the middle of the path. The Lord will lead us home from pagans or false Christianity or any false religion. If we stay the course and we stay fixated with that light of God's grace above us and the path following nary according to where the evangelist has led us until we reach safely home. Now the question is this: are you ready to walk in the middle of the path? Or are we comfortable and are we kind of straying, kind of checking out the ditch on the one side and the quagmire on the other and kind of experimenting because we don't feel the danger, we don't see the danger, things are kind of comfortable? Or are we reminded of the dangers that can lurk in the darkness? Well, the Christian life is not for the faint of heart. It is not for those who are casual strolling around. It's for those who take God at His word and take every one of his word as safeguards for every step of the way. We will not walk, even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil, for the Lord is with us. Let us take hope in that as we continue our journey next time.